What's up, everyone, and welcome to Beer Breakdown, where we dig into the stories behind some of our favorite beers with the brewers that brew them. My name's Gary, founder of Hopped LA, and I am stoked to bring to you another episode of this podcast. Today, we are talking to Sam Tierney of Firestone Walker. He heads up the R&D brewery over at the Propagator location in Venice. And it is really interesting hearing his perspective and learning more about his role over at the Propagator location. Firestone Walker is such a legendary brewery for 25 years now, putting out some of the best craft beers that you can find. And when you're a brewery of that size and of that age and with that legacy, it can be difficult to play around and experiment with some of the newer technologies and products and styles. And that's really what Sam's mission is at the Propagator. He's playing with a lot of really cool stuff, putting out some really interesting beers. And we're talking about one of their latest releases today. This one is called Psychedelic Arcade. This is a West Coast Double IPA. It's got a bunch of hops in it. It's 9%. It's right up my alley. It's really delicious. So as always, this podcast pairs perfectly with the beer itself. So if you do not have this beer, pause the podcast and get a hold of it. Go down to the Propagator in Venice and pick up a 4-pack. Head over to their website. I believe you can order it shipped to your house throughout California. But really just try and get your hands on it. And if it's sold out, just wait for the next Propagator Series release. They're putting out a bunch of really cool beers on draft at the brew pub itself in Venice, but also putting out cans about once a month. So, get your hands on this stuff. Some really cool beers, really cool conversation with Sam. I feel like I have a better appreciation for Firestone Walker and everything that they do after this conversation. So I hope you guys take away the same things that I did. And Psychedelic Arcade, delicious, delicious beer. Let's get into the podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Hilo Liquor. Hilo is the best bottle shop and beer store in the LA area. They have a location in Culver City, a location in Long Beach, and they're bringing in some of the best beers from around LA, outside of LA, throughout Southern California, throughout the country, just everywhere that good beer is being produced. Hilo is somehow tracking it down and bringing it into their store for you to purchase and enjoy. Can't say enough good things about what Hilo's up to. Their stores are just super cool. Neighborhood, market, upscale, grocery, beer, liquor, wine, all that fun stuff. Whatever you need, you're going to find it at Hilo. And the beer selection is second to none there. Their beer buyer, Tim, puts together such an amazing selection of different beers, different styles. Just looking at their Instagram just now with some of the new stuff they got in. Cellar, Highland Park, El Segundo, Fremont, Untitled Art, Grimm, Bottle Logic. They had Wren House in a little while ago. They had Great Notion. They had DeGard. They had 450 North. So if you're into that smoothie sour game, they really got you covered no matter what type of beer that you're into. Highly recommend them. Plus on Fridays at their Long Beach location, they do like a special flight where they're usually curating something really interesting and delicious that you can pair up with food trucks and pop-up food vendors that they have at the store a lot of the weekend nights. So once again, check out Hilo, Culver City, Long Beach. Go to hiloliquor.com, place your order online. They ship, they deliver. Basically, Hilo is your new best friend. So check them out. Hilo, drink well. Well, thanks for joining me today, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm stoked.
So you mentioned you just came down from picking up coffee. Where were you picking up from?
So there's a Ragamuffin Coffee Roasters up in Oxnard, and we had played around a little bit with some of their coffee that they had given us earlier, and I liked it, so we're going to try a full batch. And so I was just getting some stuff from them. It's this Ethiopian something mountain, Kaya Mountain or something, so stoked on it.
Nice. Are you a coffee drinker, like just straight coffee in your personal life?
Yeah, yeah. I definitely been through the coffee gig thing. Yeah, like used to be really into doing all kinds of like different methods, pour overs, and like got into espresso for a little bit too. But yeah, these days not so much. I've kind of gotten out of that, but I'm still interested in interesting coffees for beer. So
Yeah. Yeah, there's some fun crossover there, and obviously the ingredients play well
yeah.
together. Cool, man. Well, for anyone that doesn't know, I always kind of start things off this way. Firestone Walker, I mean, I feel like everybody kind of knows who Firestone Walker is. Celebrating that 25-year milestone right now. Just really established, really respected brand. But the Propagator specifically, where you're based out of, tell us a little bit about the Propagator location.
So yeah, the Propagator's been open for 5 years now, late 2016, and I think we're just about onto the fifth anniversary of the first brew down here. The restaurant opened a few months before the brewery got going, and then we finally got the brewery moving. And first batch was actually Wookey Jack, and
Nice.
yeah, I was just thinking about that because we just brewed that this week again, and that'll be coming out in cans again next month. We're really excited about that. But yeah, so we opened here, back in 2016, and it just the idea was to do R&D scale stuff for Firestone, since we had never actually had a small brew house at that point. We made it quite a while without having a little brew house. So whenever we needed to try out a new concept, we would do a 50-barrel batch on the big brew house. And that's for better or worse that that we made that work. But finally we were like, we could be doing this a little bit more efficiently, and we could get more out of it. We could, and I think the time that we decided to do this, which was going out, 7-8 years, when we got the ball rolling, that's when we really knew that we needed to, start working on more new things, more new beers. And because I think traditionally Firestone didn't have a very big portfolio compared to a lot of other breweries. And opening the Propagator was kind of a step in the direction of saying, hey, we're going to start working on a lot more new beers, and we need a little more capability to work those things out and to experiment.
Yeah, and I think you see that play out really nicely. Like the intention of we're going to use this as R&D, and then 5 years later, we have things like Luponic Distortion and Mine Haze that have this like really nice rotation of hops and different ingredients and processes. And then I know the Propagator Series is a thing that I think are essentially beers that are small beers brewed there that are like kind of scaled up and then brought to the big brew house and brought to the masses in a little bit stronger way. And yeah, I mean, you didn't have that stuff 5 years ago. You had, a lot of the traditional stuff that Firestone was known for. And I think it's really cool to see how, the idea, the execution really kind of takes like a legacy beer brand into, staying relevant and staying exciting. I think that's the biggest thing in today's beer market is just staying exciting. And that's, I think, what that location allows you to do, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Just having the flexibility to pursue new ideas in ways that we couldn't before. I look back now and think like it's amazing to see what things were like before this. But the brewery really has changed. I mean, we've had to adapt with the changing market over the years, and working on more new releases is definitely something that is just what you have to do to keep up now. And I think in order to remain relevant and to keep putting out the highest quality beer in flavor profiles that keep up with the way people's tastes are evolving too, is just something that you've got to keep up on your game. And so you've got to keep exploring and trying new things all the time in order to do that.
What does the brewing team makeup look like specifically at the Propagator? Is it just you, or do you have people helping you out?
So there's just two of us, and it's not I think we'll do probably about 700 barrels of beer, and I think that's about, for annual production for a pub, that's actually pretty healthy. So we have a 10 hectoliter brew house, and then 20 barrel tanks. So we mostly double batch, but we could do single batches. And it's just myself and Roland Montgomery, who's the assistant brewer here, and he's been on for just over a year now. And yeah, the two of us get everything done from doing all the brewing and all the packaging and cleaning and keeping things up. And it's interesting because it's so small scale for Firestone. Coming from I worked for years up at the main brewery before coming down, and it's a bit, you get down here and you're like, oh, there's not much, but it's a good opportunity to take care of the beer, from getting the raw materials in to making sure that beer's tasting perfect on tap and touching it at every point in the process. So it's definitely a different experience than how we work on the big team up there, where we're a little more specialized.
Yeah, I feel like when you get together with your buddies up in Paso and it's like talking about your days, like you're getting your hands dirty in a little bit different way than some of those guys up there. And yeah, it sounds like a pretty sweet gig. I mean, I feel like it's one of those things, like in any job, like grass is always greener. Like you're sitting there maybe kind of like unloading grain or whatever, and you're like, damn, my buddies up there, they're just kind of like, they got a lot more equipment and room and space and everything to deal with all this stuff. But then maybe, they're thinking like, oh, it'd be nice to kind of like, see a beer through from like start to finish and get like really hands-on in the process. So it's an interesting gig that you got, like you said. So what did that look like? How did you get there? Like, take me back to like when you started at Firestone, and how you got into that space.
Yeah, well, it's been just over 10 years now. And, looking back at that time, I got hired just out of brewing school pretty much as a brewer, and, was on the couple different shifts, basically, started on the swing shift, then quickly went to night shift. We were already brewing 24 hours a day at that point in 2011. And I think we were shutting down for a little bit on Sundays. Maybe we were taking like 1 or 2 nights off. I think, yeah, it was basically we were taking 2 nights off at that point, but then we were overnight during the week. And so we would run an overnight crew of 2 guys. And so, yeah, that was quite the learning experience to get into the brewery at that point and really, learn the ropes. And it all happened pretty fast. And then, I was cleaning tanks overnight and bright tanks and getting the filter ready for the next day, and then jumping into the brew house and helping out there. And yeah, it was a really great experience to really get into the big production scale like that. After that, I came back on days and started doing some of the Union barrel work and some more bourbon barrel work. And then got on filter for a while. And so I kind of like went around, doing all the shift brewing stuff. And then after 3 years of that, I went up to be our QC brewer, which handles yeast management. So yeah, just doing yeast propagation, yeast harvests, making sure all that stuff was happening and that all the beers had the yeast they needed, keeping track of all that stuff. So, big production brewery yeast is definitely one of the key components that you always have to be up on. And so that's, one of the key positions there. And then also, got to do a little more work with the bourbon barrels and stuff during that, and some of the really small, new projects we were doing before we had this brew house, when we would do small batch stuff. But yeah, then after that, did that for a few years there, and then I was cellar manager for a couple years after that, and so I was just managing the cold side operations, all the fermentation, dry hopping, and bringing in new tanks, clarification. We got a new centrifusion filter during that time too. So there were a lot of really great projects. Just being part of a dynamic growing brewery for a period of pretty big growth was really exciting, and it was really fun to be a part of. And that was a really great experience. And then basically about 2.5 years now, Slot opened up down here and wanted to make the move down to LA, and so came down and started running the Propagator brewery, and just kind of got a renewed focus on raw materials, more on the malt side. Being a cellar guy for a while there, I was really focusing on dry hopping, so I got to spend a ton of time focusing on hops and dry hopping, and then a lot of time working on the mechanical side, getting a centrifuge and a new filter, and and we were running a flash pasteurizer for barrels and things like that. So we had a lot of new equipment that I really liked, that side, the kind of mechanical technical process of, and learned a ton and had great experiences there. But getting down to a little smaller scale, I think has been good, because you get back in touch a little bit more with the ingredients, and I got to geek out on malt again, where I just I kind of like didn't care much about malt for a while there, because I was like, well, they make wort in the brew house, and that's not my department now, so I'm just not going to worry about that. So, coming down here, I had to kind of dive through all the malt supplier catalogs and, look at everything and start, thinking, okay, how can we be looking at new ingredients and new stuff like that. So, so that was really great to get into. And yeah, and just, the last couple of years have been just working on new ideas, new projects, and all the new stuff that's coming out of here.
That's cool. And your last, like, as you were like ending your stint up in Paso, Did you have your eye on that Venice gig? Were you thinking like I'd like to go to something smaller scale, or was it just more of like location and serendipity of opportunity?
Yeah, it all just kind of worked out for the most part, you know.
You weren't like I'm sick of this, like I need something to energize me. It was more just like, transition to the next challenge.
Yeah, I mean, I loved how things were going up there, and I think, just it's just kind of how life happened, Also some family influences
Yeah.
and some things, some interests my wife had to kind of push me in the direction. So, yeah, I just think it was good timing, and I thought, this is a great opportunity to do something a little different and, and apply my experience in a different facet for the company, and I think it's worked out really well.
Yeah, like I said, it's a cool gig. Awesome that you get to run that, and yeah, I mean, I guess when I'm thinking about what you're doing at the Propagator, like the word innovation kind of comes to mind, like R&D innovation, like pushing the boundary, trying new things, maybe breaking the process a little bit. When you think about innovation, research and development, you have like best practices on one side, like having to kind of like understand and master those, and then innovation on the other side. So like it's kind of a pretty interesting responsibility that you have to like think outside the box a little bit, think a little bit more forward, break the process. I feel like as a brewer, you can get really trapped into process, the boxes of process, and consistency, especially at the scale of Firestone up in Paso. Like, you can get stuck in process, and so I feel like it takes like a very unique type of mindset as a brewer to go into that R&D facility and to push it to where it needs to go. So like what has put you up to the challenge there?
Yeah, I think it's like, to approach this well and to do this well, I think you have to be willing to just look at everything and not be too trapped into kind of the dogma of how you think things need to be done. That can be a difficult needle to thread, though, sometimes, because I think we have to look at the success that we've had over the years and what we know makes good beer, and sometimes it's daunting to kind of stray from that and say, okay, well, should we try this new thing out, because that maybe works for somebody else, but I don't know if it's going to work for us, and I don't know if it's the right thing to do. And that's mostly process. That's mostly looking at like just different ways brewers approach all the fundamentals of how they make their wort, what their how they do their mash, what their pH targets are, what kind of water profiles they use, how are you doing hop additions, what sorts of, especially when it gets into IPAs and hazies and things like that, like there's so many different ways to approach it. And, and I think you've just got to be open to kind of methodically going through and saying, okay, how do I optimize all this, and how do I figure out the best way to get this done? And looking for new flavor profiles too, I think is part of it. Is like, you've got to be willing to go out there and say, okay, what's something that we're not currently doing, and how do we get there, and then make it happen. I guess, and this is maybe coming from a lot of my production experience, but it's just like consistently getting it done and saying, like, if you are trying new things, that's great, but you have to be doing it in a way that you're getting something out of it. You're getting good data out of it. You're learning something. You're getting something useful out of it, and you're making a good beer. Because, in the end, just being creative and doing new stuff doesn't get you anywhere if the end result isn't making a great beer. And I think that's what it really comes down to, is that, like, staying steadfast to what we know, the quality standards that we hold. And that's really important, because I think, like, that's always our driving, ethos, is like that, we want to make the highest quality beer that we can, and you've got to be careful, I think, when it comes to some things, because there's a lot of things out there that can lead you astray. But you've got to be also willing to go out there and fail sometimes and say, okay, well, that didn't necessarily work, but we had to try it. And part of what we do here is, take some of those chances where it's like, okay, not sure if this is going to work, this combination of things that we're going to do, but we've got to start somewhere. Luckily, though, there's so much creativity in craft beer these days that there's almost nothing out there that hasn't been done in some combination. Maybe it hasn't been done the exact way you would do it, but like whenever we're looking at like a new ingredient or something that seems kind of crazy, you can always look and say, well, somebody else is doing that well. So, there's hardly any breweries out there now doing things that are like fundamentally different than anybody else. It's just, there's so much saturation in the market as far as good ideas. So part of it is just being attentive you know. And I think like in just going out there and saying what really interesting stuff is out there that we can be inspired by, and then taking it back and imagining it through how we know how to make quality beer. So I think that's really important, is just being open and being really inquisitive and, you know, not giving up on that.
Does that manifest itself in like other beverage companies, other, you know, food products, or is it just like outside of like ingestible materials altogether? Like, where do you draw your inspiration from?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've been, you know, wine number one. That's, you know, I think also just being up in wine country on the Central Coast too. That's always been a big thing for us, and, you know, doing some wine hybrid beers has been a fun, you know, kind of tangent that we've gone on over the years, you know, here and there. But just kind of the way they approach flavor too, and blending, and, you know, that's kind of driven us for a long time, as far as like looking at beers and thinking, you know, because a winemaker doesn't look at a wine necessarily out in the vineyard and say, well, that's my wine, you know. That's a lot, and that's gonna make a wine at some point, but, you know, it could get blended with anything, you know, and they know the end result they want to make. And I think that sometimes we approach beer a little bit more like that, and so we like blending a lot, and so we're always using that as a tool to say, okay, you know, maybe we made this new base beer that we really like, but it can become something really great with a little something else added. And sometimes the best way to do that is actually to blend downstream. I don't know as many brewers that kind of take that approach like we do, and that's always been something that we're really into. So definitely the winemaking world is really influential in that aspect. At the same time, I definitely get a lot of influence from coffee. Like I was saying, you know, with the, you know, just today, going and picking up some coffee for a new beer, and just, you know, the approach that coffee makers take in the flavors they get. It's a very different beverage, but I don't know. I mean, we were just talking about, you know, making cold brew versus basically, you know, a lot of the times the way we like to add coffee is to basically make cold brew with beer, to add, you know, add the coffee directly to the beer, and just comparing our methods and seeing like why necessarily, you know, do you get this different outcome if you do it this way with beer versus this way with your cold brew coffee, which is basically just water, you know, instead of beer. So I don't know, I get, you know, you can get great conversations with coffee roasters when it comes to that sort of stuff. Cocktails too. The cocktail world has been really influential, and, you know, we have a whole series of barrel aged beers that we've done that have kind of gone down the road of cocktail beers. And, you know, we haven't done as much of that here at the Propagator, but definitely on the barrel side, that's been a big influence. And you know, and a little bit, obviously, and I think it has in the whole world too. You know, the tiki world has been pretty influential, and I think a lot of brewers are,
True.
you know, looking to there. But a lot of it's just, you know, is beer tradition though. You know, I think there's so much to mine in the tradition of beer that, you know, you don't necessarily have to look outside of beer. You can just look at the various traditions as they exist, and then say, you know, how do you combine elements of, you know, mostly, you know, different European traditions with some new stuff, you know. And I think that's what we're always looking for, is how do you approach, you know, maybe our West Coast sensibility, or, you know, how we do hops and the new hops that are inspiring us, and how do you maybe, you know, see how that works with some of the old world stuff at the same time.
A lot of what interests me a lot right now is, as the further we get from old world and traditional stuff, the more we can kind of like cyclically like go back to it and say, okay, we've gone pretty far here, like let's look back at where we started and see how we can, you know, kind of come back and borrow from and get inspired by some of that stuff, and the limitations of ingredient, of process, of technology back then, and how do we recreate, or how do we think outside the box with that kind of environmental scenarios in mind in today's modern brew house. I think that kind of stuff is really fascinating to me. The DBA is an interesting example of that, even though you guys have been doing that for a while. Not that you're changing it, but that was an example of like taking that kind of old world style and how do we figure this out for today's modern age. And it's drinking today better, you know, as good as it was back then, if not better. So that's a really cool beer to look back to. I think what's interesting, you know, what makes you a really interesting follow on Twitter, at Into the Brew, if anyone wants to follow, it kind of gave me a little bit of a mindset, like before we started talking about how you approach, you know, the innovation side of things. And it seems, you know, like you started out homebrewing before going to school. It seems like you're still kind of like tapped into the homebrew community in a way that I don't see many like commercial brewers still doing. Like I don't know if it's the forums or if you just keep in touch with friends or whatever, but looking at what's happening at the small scale and seeing how that can inspire you or what you can learn from what's happening at the homebrew side. I've seen several tweets of yours that are like more over my head and homebrew nerdy than I can ever get. I'm just not there, but it's interesting to see where you go there. Like, I mean, you're probably not homebrewing at home these days, but what are you getting from those conversations, and what are you getting from those interactions in the homebrew community today?
Yeah, well, shout out to the Maltose Falcons. I just did a tasting with those guys on Friday, and we went through a different flight of beers that they picked up here, and that was a lot of fun. And just to kind of open up a couple bags of worms with them, I think we brought up like low oxygen brewing systems, and just to see the reactions as soon as that came up was really interesting. Just some of the stuff that's polarizing in the homebrew world. And yeah, I mean, I think those kinds of conversations are always great, and I love talking with homebrewers because, in homebrewing you have this kind of sense of exploration and wonder that I think you lose when you go to the commercial scale, because everything that you're making commercially is, with the intent of saying, someone's got to buy this, and we do a little bit here that sometimes it's like, well, whatever happens, happens. And I think, and homebrewers, obviously, sometimes the kind of the idea that I might have to dump this 5 or 10 gallons of beer that I, spent a whole day on, and, maybe it was my one day off this week I wanted to homebrew, and then the whole thing's wrong because, I did something too crazy and something like that. So I think there's, obviously you have your own motivations as a homebrewer not to just make things that you're going to dump down the drain. But yeah, you do have, some freedoms and some creativity that comes with that because you don't have the commercial constraints. And I think, so much of when you look back, the influence of craft beer today came from the homebrewing world. I mean, there's always this through line of professional brewing that, we look back to. So, the beer we're releasing this weekend is based on a traditional American Bock recipe from 1909 that was just published in Craft Beer and Brewing magazine, which I found really interesting. And author Jeff Alworth, who is going to be here to talk about his new book on Sunday, he helped pick that out with me, and and that was really fun to do. And so you look back on that and you're saying, well, that's straight from a brewery 112 years ago, and we're really inspired by what they did, and that's real American brewing tradition. And I love looking back into the past like that. And it's interesting because there are so many cool things that brewers did, and we lost a lot of that, and I think part of American homebrewing was relearning all of that and saying, the commercial industry had lost a lot of the traditions that American brewers used to hold on to because just, beer became such a mass-produced product. And, there were always a few breweries hanging on to some of the old recipes and some of the old things, a few of the old regional breweries. But, homebrewers really resurrected a lot of the traditions that we have today and brought them to the U.S. Traditions that always existed in Europe, maybe, if you look back, how many homebrewers were making Czech-style dark lagers for years before it got popular, in commercial breweries. And I think that, it's fun because that style's kind of having a moment right now where I'm seeing everybody starting to brew them now. And that's awesome, and that was something that I was jazzed up about a few years ago. And I think it was something maybe published on the American Homebrewers Association website, the original first article that I read about that. There's just so much energy coming from it. And I think there's just that boundless amount of creativity that you have with everybody doing their own thing.
Is it intentional on your part to stay glued into that community, or is it just a personal passion and interest of yours?
I mean, it's something I try to keep up on. Definitely, every now and then, when I got a little time and I think about it, I dive into some of the homebrew forums and see what people are talking about, because there's always something crazy that they're doing. I just wouldn't necessarily see. It's not necessarily reflected in what the other craft brewers around us are doing. Maybe they're one step ahead. So yeah, it definitely takes getting in touch with it, and then on social media too, there's a couple great homebrewers that I like to follow, that, sometimes I'll talk about what they do. But yeah, for the most part, it's just, take a look, see what's happening. I still get Zymergy magazine. Whenever that shows up at the brewery, I'm reading that and, and seeing what the American Homebrew Association's saying. And yeah, it's great to look. You see, every year when the National Homebrew Awards are done, I'll see what were all the winning beers, and they'll print their recipes. And it's interesting to see some of the homebrewers' approaches to, making IPAs and things like that, where we're so focused on the specifics of how we do it on our system. And then sometimes you'll look at that and you'll be like, oh, that's an interesting thing that I hadn't really considered, I remember homebrewers were talking about cool whirlpools, which now are pretty standard for making hazy IPA is cooling down the whirlpool to lower your IBUs and to kind of increase some of the aromatic oil retention. And I mean that was something that back, I don't know, going back almost 10 years ago, people were talking about, and that became pretty standard. So it's just, there's some things like that you can easily do on a homebrew system that, when brewers were figuring out how to do that, people had to start building in recirculation loops through their chillers or coming up with different ways of doing it. And so we had to kind of figure that out where it wasn't necessarily something that you could just do. So there's always something fun like that happening, I guess.
Yeah, that's cool. Before we get into the beer that we're going to be talking about today, there's one that I was just sipping on that I wanted to ask you about. It's one of my favorites lately. Welcome to LA. This beer, it's labeled a West Coast lager, 5.4%. Yeah, just a really neat beer. And this one started as a small batch, like Propagator release, I think last year, right?
That was actually 2019, summer of 2019, or late spring. I forget when the first batch was. But yeah, it's a beer that we were working on for a long time down here.
So tell me about, when I see this in the small 12-ounce can, it doesn't say Propagator on it anymore. This has now been fully scaled up to, full production up in the Central Coast. So, tell me kind of, what is the journey like for a beer, that gets brought up like that? Did you know... When did you guys know that was going to happen, and what kind of changes? What's your involvement in that process along the way?
So that one's a little bit unique. Most of the beers, a lot of the trial beer we do here is made with a firm plan of where it's going to go. So we say, okay, here's a beer that we want to make for next year. Let's start working that out. Or, here's an idea that we agree we want to work on, and then, we're going to see what happens to that, and we already kind of know what it's going to turn into. And there's a few other examples of that. But that's a lot of the, seasonal releases and new beers that we've done have kind of start like that, where there's already a plan for what it's going to be, and we know it's going to be a beer. I was just thinking of our new Cinnamon Dolce Stout that just came out, just hit the market right now, and that was, one of those beers where we came up with the combination, and we were like, that's it, we want cinnamon and vanilla for our new stout, and now let's go trial it and figure out exactly the flavor, profile we want and how we're going to do all that. That's one way of addressing it, basically, and so that's a lot of the trial work we do. But Welcome to LA was different because Welcome to LA, it was just kind of an idea, right? It was, let's do a hoppy lager, kind of, approaching it like hopping it like an IPA, but making a lower ABV, lighter lager, more like a Pilsner, and just kind of see where that takes us. It's funny, that's actually Fly Jack, our, low kind of calorie, light hazy IPA. Welcome to LA, I think that first trial batch was actually part of the first trials to figure out what Fly Jack was going to be. Then we ended up brewing, so we knew we wanted a low ABV hoppy beer. And we said, well, maybe it'll be a lager, maybe it'll be an IPA. And then, so we brewed a few different versions of that. It ended up being Fly Jack. We ended up going the hazy IPA route because that, I think at the time we were like, this is where it's at. This is what we should be pursuing. But the other thread of that turned into Welcome to LA as we know it now. And, that was a name that I just came up with because I think that was actually the first original batch that I put together when I moved down here. And I don't know, it was just one of those kind of names where it was like, oh, that sounds fun. Let's do it. Cranking out trial batches, you can imagine. A lot of brewers can relate to this. Names are difficult. It's hard to keep coming up with names, and a lot of the good ones are taken, and that's just how it goes. And somehow that one wasn't, and we liked it. So that's just kind of happenstance. And so we just kept brewing it though. Every time we do a new beer and people just kind of connect with it, and people go, "This was really good. I like this. We should keep pursuing this." So even though it didn't turn into what we wanted to do in the kind of new session IPA realm, we just kept brewing it because we liked it and we wanted to see where that took us. So we kind of bumped up the ABV a little bit for a while in more like the 6% realm and kind of made it into, we were calling it an IPL, and tried different hop combinations, brewed a few different batches, different approaches. And then, at that point it just kind of got some energy and people kept saying, we should do, we should make this into a release and scale this up because, they like the name. Everybody was liking the flavor profile, liked the idea of having a hoppy lager in the portfolio. We had done a couple hoppy lagers before. I was thinking Westside Bevo, which was a collaboration with Beavertown that we did a few years ago. That had been really popular, people like that. And we just kept, we'd brewed a few batches like that, and it seemed like that was the one. So then the recipe kind of gets crystallized. We did a can release out of the Propagator last fall, so that was the first time we packaged Welcome to LA.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, we did 16-ounce cans. It was the same label, but it was a sticker, on a silver can, like we do all the releases down here. And that was it. It was a little delayed because of COVID. Initially, we were going to try to launch it on a full scale last year, and then it kind of got pushed out, and we decided to just do that small can release here, and then knew that we were going to bring it back on a larger scale here. So, yeah, and then once we decide what we're going to do with a release like that, you have to go through the process of then ramping it up and getting a batch brewed up there on the big system. And every recipe we trial here, we know is going to come out a little bit different. You can't brew the exact same recipe on a 10 hectoliter brew house versus a 300 hectoliter brew house and make it work. So there's always some back and forth that goes on. So we did tweak the recipe a little bit, and then just decided that that's what we were going to go with. And so a couple hop tweaks. I think we brewed the first batch. We're a little bit unsure about the hop aroma, so slight tweak for the second one, but pretty much got it there. And malt profile is super simple for a pilsner, so that wasn't too difficult. Just dialing in the alcohol, and the attenuation and all that. So I'm really happy with how it came out. Yeah, it's a really cool beer. It's one of my favorites right now. I feel like West Coast lager, or hoppy lager, or whatever you want to call it. Like a lot of them tend to go big, like all modern hops that are just big and fruity, and this one still has a little bit of that like nobleness. I don't know if they're noble hops or anything kind of related to that, but it has a little bit of that kind of like spicy herbal thing as well that I think just brings it all together. It's really, really nice. So hopefully people buy this a lot so that you guys keep making it, because I don't want this one to go away. I'm hoping the Dodgers hang on here, because I think we got it out in the world just in time. Hopefully to ride some of the energy right now, but yeah, I mean, like you're saying, it does have a little bit of that noble component, and we really like throwing in noble hops earlier in the boil and combining them with the American hop. So that's what's really going on there. It's kind of a full spectrum actually. So we have some traditional noble in the boil, and that gets you a really nice clean bitterness, but then some of that nice kind of spicy hop flavor also comes through, since that's how those hops are best utilized, is boiling them. There's some Mandarina Bavaria in the dry hop too, and it's a German hop, but it's a new school German hop that's got a nice citrusy aroma, but it still maintains a little bit of that spirit of the German hop too, a little bit of that spiciness. And so I think that kind of bridges into using Simcoe and Mosaic, and we got some Motueka in there too. So it's kind of a full spectrum, kind of hitting you with some good fruity aspects, some good American character, but also bringing it back to kind of let you know that, like, yeah, this is a lager, and it's showing a little bit of its original DNA. Yeah, it's super cool. Love that. And you were talking a little bit about the history behind that beer, brewing it for a little while on tap at the Propagator, and that was probably the only way to get it. Maybe you sent some kegs up north, but you had to go to the Venice location usually to get that beer. Yeah, so tell me a little bit about like the Propagator experience. Like, well, how's it different from going up to Barrel Works or up to Paso? What's specific to the Venice location that people can expect? And also, I feel like sometimes if you're like, hey, we should go to Firestone Walker, people might be like, oh, I can get Firestone Walker like around the corner from here, like it's so easy to find, so why do I need to go out there? Like, what's unique about the Propagator? Well, part of it was bringing Firestone down to LA, and so it's going to share a lot with what you're going to get. If you visit the brewery up in Paso, the restaurant's going to be similar. The store's going to, it's going to have a lot of the same beer, where you're going to be able to get some cool vintage beers you're not going to find anywhere else. Some Bearworks beers going back. We like to keep a good selection of all the vintage and Bearworks stuff. So definitely, if you're into those styles, we're going to be the only place that you can get a lot of that. That just, some of those beers get out into distribution, but a lot of them are brewery only released now, some of the smaller stuff. So definitely worth coming over for that. And then, but as far as, Propagator specifically, having the brewery here, that really allows us to, this is that kind of rare opportunity that you're going to get that beer, the day it's kegged, it goes on tap, and, we still got it. You can get our beers on tap at the other pubs at Bearworks and in Buellton, or sorry, in Paso. It's not going to be quite the same. You're not going to get the same selection for sure. I mean, you'll come, I think usually we have like 9 or 10 Propagator beers on tap here. And, that's something that you're not going to get at the other spots. So definitely we're focusing on the beers we make here. We usually have about 35, 36 beers on tap. So, there's going to be plenty, if you're a fan of any of the Fireworks stuff, obviously we have all the core stuff, we have always a good selection of vintage beers that we rotate through, whenever the new stuff is, and we'll throw on older stuff too at times. And then, we like to go through a few different Bearworks beers, so we always have a few of those on tap. But we're focusing on the Propagator beers as well. And so we like to keep those around, as long as long as we can, so that if you're coming down, you can really taste through everything we're doing here.
Yeah, I think it's pretty special. And I was looking at the tap list the other day, and I was like, shit, man, I wish I had like 6 hours, because I could really sit down and do some damage here. There's just taking you from, a lot of barrel stuff that you don't see around here, and then all of that kind of one-off propagator stuff that, yeah, you just like are like, oh, that's super cool that they're playing around with this style or with this ingredient. And I think one of the cool things about Firestone in particular is that the beer, most people already know is world class, right? It's in a league of its own. But the kind of pub experience is also awesome too. Like, just really strong hospitality experience. The food's really good. Just the whole service environment is really nice. And so having that here in LA is awesome. I think I personally don't take advantage of it enough. So if you're listening to this, you haven't heard it, definitely check out the Propagator. Just great food, great beer. It's a really cool experience overall. One of the things that I wanted to touch on in regards to innovation and R&D is ingredients. I know that you just came back from a trip up to Yakima for harvest, so I'd love to hear a little bit about what that's all about. But I know the concentration of innovation in the industry tends to focus in around hops and hop products. But I know it's happening everywhere. So I'd love to hear about what you're excited about innovation wise for ingredients, whether that's malt, whether that's hops, or different types of yeast. What's anything that you're excited about?
I guess there's a little bit in every kind of area that gets us going.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, hop wise, I think we had a great experience this harvest, actually, spending a lot of time with Yakima Chief. They took us into their cryo hops facility, and I had never been there, and I hadn't been able to check that out before. And just seeing how all that's made and really getting into using some more cryo, I think, is something that we're excited for the next year. That we brewed a collaboration beer with them a couple months ago, and just that experience of really working through some of the applications of the new cryo and the blends that they're doing too, where they're able to target specific compounds for their flavor impact in the beer, and then make hop blends based on that, I think is really cool. So that's something that we're really paying attention to, and I think that's one of those things where, yeah, you said you got to get up to harvest and really check out what's actually going on up there. That's the spot. If you want to see how the cryo's made, you got to go. And that was great. I just think, yeah, malt wise, I mean, there's such a rich history of malts. It's funny how you can get so stuck on certain things, but it's good to keep an open mind too with a lot of the new stuff coming out. And I'm luckily get to play around with a little bit of the smaller craft scale malts, but those aren't really feasible for us on the larger scale, which is too bad. But I like what's going on with that. I like that we can now get California grown barley malted in California. That makes really good beer, and I think that's really cool. And I love it when smaller brewers take advantage of that. We're at a large enough scale that we have to get malt from some of the larger maltsters, and we have great relationships with some of the bigger companies, and it's just obviously the quality of malting barley, like up in Alberta, for example, is phenomenal. And there's a region, that's one of the top barley growing regions in the world, and so we get a lot of great stuff from up there. And Pacific Northwest as well. We love Gambrinus as well. Lots of great stuff, and we're always looking at, whenever you're doing a new product, a new beer's coming out, you're kind of looking at the malts you use, and then looking at bringing in different malts. And sometimes I was just thinking how much Pilsner malt we use from Gambrinus now, which was something that we brought in originally when we were developing Firestone Lager and did our first batches down here, and we're looking for a nice option that we could get in bulk for our scale, and that turned into a really good malt that we now use in lots of different beers that now sometimes I'm using in IPAs and things like that. I mean, even going into yeast, like I was saying, you've got to be open to new things. We have our Firestone house yeast that is really core to our beers, and you can't, 805 is not 805 without it, Union Jack's not Union Jack without it, and that's really important. But bringing in a new yeast when we started developing hazy IPAs and trialing new yeast down here was a really good experience, and we learned a lot from trying a bunch of new stuff. And I still like to do that sometimes, even if we don't think that, I think whenever the conversation approaches, bringing a new yeast strain into the big brewery, everyone just goes, "Oh, I don't want to deal with that. It's so much work, on a large scale to bring in another strain and work with it normally." I think right now we're handling 3 yeast full time, and I think that's enough. I think the lab up there, Amy, who runs the lab, is always the first to say, she's like, "I don't know about that. I don't know if you want to do a new, bring something in differently, just because it's another thing that they have to work on." And then the guys that handle the yeast harvesting, aren't always loving that, but I still keep trying new stuff when I can because you never know what you're gonna find. I like the experiments we've done with Kveik yeast have been really interesting.
Yeah, I was just interested in that, just in innovation in ingredients, and because I feel like that if there's anyone at Firestone that is tasked with that responsibility, like, hey, this is new, play with this, like it's probably you, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, I guess every facet comes along, and things keep changing. Now, if you're going to do a kettle sour, well, think of how that's evolved over the years. First it was just putting some grain in the kettle and letting the wild microbes on the grain sour it, and then obviously that has some issues because you don't really know what you're getting. But some brewers still do that, and they've figured out how to dial in their process to make good beer doing that. And then there's the brewers that use yogurt. And then you can get lactobacillus from yogurt, which is interesting. But then obviously, there's the vegan concern if you want to make vegan beer. And so, then when we first started doing it, we were getting a lacto culture that we would get sent in, a pitch from a lab. And that was great. And we absolutely loved that. But then we stopped using that regularly. And so, you go out and look, okay, what are you going to do next? So actually the last thing we tried, which was really interesting, was a freeze-dried lacto that comes in like a powder that you keep in the freezer. And you can inoculate your wort with that. And that makes really great kettle sour beers. Whenever something like that comes across, I'm thinking, oh, that's really interesting. Like I can get a freeze-dried pouch of lactobacillus, and it stays in my freezer until I need to brew a batch, and it's good to go, and then it makes this really great kettle sour. So just, looking at new tools like that, keeping up with the suppliers. Every new email that comes in from a supplier, you kind of got to look through and say, okay, what's new? What's going on. I used to get a lot more visits. It's starting to happen again, but pre-COVID, we would get so many people rolling through here pitching me on different stuff. Every person that works for a different ingredient company, whether it's malt or hops or fruits and things like that. So they're starting to come back again. And I love those conversations because you can kind of just see what's out there, and sometimes something just piques your interest. You never know.
Yeah, totally. Real quick, the Propagator pre-COVID, there was the objective for the Propagator for R&D, for bringing Firestone down to Venice, and then COVID hits. Basically, the Propagator plan is kind of thwarted. I mean, a lot of breweries' plans were screwed up by that. But what does it look like now? Like, what had to change coming out of COVID for the Propagator specifically, for what you're doing in the brewing program? And what does that mean for the future? Are you like, just how do we get back to where we were, or are things changed for a while, and here's our new direction?
Well, I think at this point we've kind of made a new equilibrium that we're pretty happy with. The first big change was, how do we keep making beer? We did all draft beer. We didn't do any canning or bottling here, and that was hard. For the first month or two there, we didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know how long things would last. So there was a lot of uncertainty, obviously, and everyone was having to deal with that and then figure out what their next move was at that point. So for us, it was really about figuring out the brewing aspect, and so we started pivoting to some other projects. We made some more beer for Barrelworks. That's another fun facet to what we do here that people might not realize, is that Barrelworks doesn't have a brew house. So all of the beer that comes out of Barrelworks either starts in Paso or it starts here, and most of it's Paso. It's just a lot more efficient to brew large batches there. So a lot of the normal base sour beers, that all comes out from up there. But down here we're able to do some really interesting stuff. So we do some lambic style beer that we make here, and we do the full traditional turbid mash process that they do at the lambic breweries in Belgium. So we did some more of that. A couple other projects that came along that we were working on last year, some sour IPA blending projects that we started out on. That was interesting. So there was that aspect where we kind of turned up, doing some stuff for Barrelworks. And then we decided that we had to can beer, basically, because the only way out of this, the only way to keep brewing, and keep our production up, if we want to keep coming out with these new batches, new ideas, it's, well, let's get them into cans and let's get them out to people, because it basically, the way Firestone is, we're a distribution brewery, right? We can't really viably sell a batch of beer in growlers at the bar, even when we were selling beer to go. It's just not going to happen. Not enough people come here. That's just not how we operate, And so we knew right off the bat that we had to pivot to doing some cans. So last summer we started doing 16-ounce cans and getting a mobile canner to come in here. And and so pretty much we've kept up on a schedule of doing that once a month. And it turned out that, keeping the brewery at full tilt here, we can actually get out a can run a month. So we'll do 200 cases per month now, and then also have enough draft beer for all 3 locations. And so we were probably brewing a little bit under capacity before. So this has actually allowed us to kind of keep maxing out the Brewhouse, maxing out what we can do here, and then also sell beer in cans and kegs. So we're actually doing more than we were pre-COVID at this point. So the can stuff has been really cool, and and that was a big team effort that took a lot of help from marketing and our direct to consumer retail side. We started shipping beer last year like everybody did, and we're shipping on our web store. You can buy vintage beers, Bearworks beers, merchandise obviously. So we started doing a lot of that, and then we just added this onto the direct shipping. So whenever we launch one of these can releases, you can go on there, order that. Order whatever other beers if you want some Bearworks or vintage beers at the same time as they get released. It's pretty good to combine those two, and we're just doing that once a month, and that's been great. So it's kind of always a mix. There's always at least one can beer you can buy here, unless it's one that sells out super fast. And then obviously we're still doing all the draft stuff too. And then just kind of from the restaurant side. We moved, I think like a lot of people did, we kind of got up on the technology where, we're using an app-based ordering system now. Try to, initially just try to keep, obviously staffing was lower and we wanted to keep contact as low as possible. And we, opened an outdoor space. So now what was a former parking lot in between the kind of office side and the brewery and the restaurant is now one giant beer garden, which is really great. We just did an Oktoberfest a few weeks ago. That was really great to be able to have that all set up outside already and kind of turn it into a German-style beer garden. I think a lot of positive developments in the end. Obviously difficult to go through, but I think we've hit our stride again and things are going really well.
Yeah, I think it's awesome. I mean, I feel like it's kind of what you guys needed, not just because of COVID, but just in terms of the can release thing being such a big driving force in where people's attention has gone, and that's changed so much since Propagator opened up originally, that this is just like a great move for even just for that too. So I mean, we have that this latest can here. I'd love to taste through this beer with you and learn a little bit more about what you got going on inside.
Right on.
Cool. Crack it open. Well, I guess first, you talked about naming. This one's called Psychedelic Arcade. Pretty sweet name. Did you have a hand in this, or was this marketing, or how did that come about?
Yeah, so that actually came from outside of brewing. That was somebody on our marketing team. And so it's fun. Sometimes, like I said, we're stressing, what we're going to name the new beers, and you never know. And but sometimes one of these names just comes. And, they go, hey, I got this great idea. And I was like, I love it. Let's do it. And then we had the same idea. The label idea came together pretty soon after that, where some of us are, have been interested in pinball and have just kind of gone down that rabbit hole. And I know our brewmaster, Matt Vernelson, loves pinball and has had some pinball machines. And so we thought that would be really fun to get that on the label and kind of do a throwback vintage pinball design for it.
Yeah, this is neat. And I know the last couple can releases you did have been hazy IPAs, I think. So this one coming in as a West Coast double. Was this intentional? Okay, we did a couple hazies. Let's go, into West Coast. Let's make it a double. Was there intention behind this, or was this kind of just all serendipitous to kind of happen this way?
Yeah, I think for this beer, I was really focused on wanting to do a West Coast double IPA after doing a few hazies, just thinking, it's time. We're not doing Double Jack again this year. That was it was really great to bring Double Jack back as a seasonal beer last year, and it had a good run. and I think people really enjoyed having Double Jack back. And then when we weren't going to do it again this year, I was thinking, okay, we've got to, you know, get something going, and like some release, you know, we can't be, you know, I was just thinking about how Double Jack for us as a year-round beer for years, you know, was a big part of the portfolio, and you know, we really held it down in the West Coast, you know, IPA game with that beer, and you know, I just wanted to bring it back and try something a little new, so we kind of came up with a completely new approach for a West Coast Double IPA, you know, a little more modern. Obviously, you know, Double Jack is a classic, and I think, you know, we still love it, but you know, it was a beer that came out, I think, 2009 was when we first did Double Jack. And so, you know, it's of that kind of that classic era. And so Psychedelic Arcade is definitely a more updated approach.
Does this beer have roots in any other like Propagator West Coast doubles that you've been working on over the years, or is this kind of like something brand new, reimagined, based upon what you had?
You know, we don't actually brew too many West Coast doubles here. I think we've done far more hazy doubles. You know, I look back and there's maybe a handful that we've actually done over the years. It seems like maybe one a year is our average, which might seem a little strange that we haven't done that many. But the last one was called Another Life, and that was very early 2020, I think. And that was one that we did for the Bistro Double IPA Festival. That's kind of like usually the time, you know, we know if we're going to brew Double IPA, get one out there. So I think next year we're actually planning on doing a Triple IPA for that too. So we're going to hit it extra hard. But yeah, as far as the double goes, you know, that was the last one, and that was kind of, Another Life was the first one that we did with all Pilsner malt, going for an extra pale profile. So Double Jack was always, you know, 2-row and just like a pinch of crystal. And so not very much. Like, I'm really literally a pinch. You know, it's not that malty of a double IPA. At least, you know, at the time it definitely wasn't compared to what else was out there.
Right.
But it's funny in retrospect, you know, beers have continued to get lighter and lighter on the West Coast side. So we thought, you know, for that one, let's just go as pale as possible. So that was just, I think, Another Life was just Pilsner malt and some wheat. And yeah, we liked how that came out. And I thought, you know, let's reapproach that for this one. So this is Pilsner malt with a little bit of rye. And the rye was just kind of to switch it up and to add that little extra dimension to it. Even though, you know, strong beer with Pilsner malt, you get that intensity of the Pilsner malt at that ABV that you get a really nice flavor from. But I like adding that rye because I think it just has a little bit of kind of structure and roundness that it adds, and some kind of like, you know, people say spice when they talk about rye beers, and it kind of is. But it's not. I don't think of it as spicy. It's more like, it's this graininess to it that's just, you know, it's the flavor of rye. It's a little more. It's got a little more going on, I guess, than just regular malt. So yeah.
Right. Cool. I'm gonna crack it open, give it a pour. Yeah, I mean, you see that really light body right off the bat, and crystal clear. Just, yeah, I mean, it's this is a light beer.
Yeah, it almost, to me, can look like you're almost brewing like a lighter pale ale, or even a lager or pilsner. Not quite pilsner. I mean, maybe more of a Czech style, you know, something slightly darker. But yeah, you know, that's brewed with our Firestone house yeast. So just, you know, our classic English ale strain, and that's really highly flocculent yeast, and it helps the beers clear up really well. And then we do fine beers here that we want to be clear, so we use a little bit of biofine in that, so it's a, you know, vegan fining. You get that clarity, that focus you get in a West Coast IPA, where it's not all the body and roundness you get in a hazy, and it's just back to that kind of like sharper hop focus.
Bursting out of the glass, hop aromas all over the place. So what are we looking at from a hop perspective on this beer? Like, what are you trying to achieve with it?
So we kind of focused on new school varieties for the most part. It's a lot of Galaxy and Strata. And then we supported that with an earlier dry hop with some Mosaic, and then a little bit of Simcoe. And so, you know, we like to get in an early dry hop to get a little bit of that kind of biotransformation, or just kind of, you know, to smooth out some of the hops that are a little more on the dank side. So I'm a big fan of Mosaic as an early dry hop, and I think that helps integrate it really well. If there's still a little bit of fermentation when the Mosaic goes on, it kind of it just kind of gets that nice kind of berry and like stone fruit character kind of integrated into the beer without some more of the dankness and the kind of like the other aspect of the Mosaic, which you get a little bit more of EVs late. So, you know, we use both approaches, but I really like Mosaic early for that reason. And then coming back again, Galaxy, Strata, and Simcoe. For me, you know, Strata, you're getting some of that like kind of sharp tropical and like citrusiness, some like kind of pink grapefruit. I mean, Strata's really cool. And then obviously Galaxy.
I love Strata.
Galaxy's like, you get that oily, ripe tropical fruit, and it's just like, yeah. So I think the combination works really well. And then Simcoe is, I'm probably just a sucker for Simcoe at this point. When it comes to a West Coast IPA, really, is that I just love that kind of combination of that piney aspect you get, and then also this like kind of slight citrusy and passion fruity thing too. And to me, it always just kind of screams classic West Coast, and it plays really well with the other hops too. We use that in the kettle and in the whirlpool, and also a little bit in the dry hop. So there's kind of a through line of that Simcoe. Simcoe's a beautiful hop to use in the kettle too. It's got really nice bitterness, and the flavor comes through really well. And then we added a pinch of Idaho 7 in the whirlpool too, and to go along with the Simcoe. And Idaho 7, I think, brings out kind of just a little bit more of that round fruitiness. To me, Idaho 7 is almost, it's like this mix of kind of like almost bubble gum. It just kind of round sweet fruit. So hopefully that, all comes across. Obviously, it's a big blend of hops. Not as many as we use in some other beers. We're known to like our hop blends. I think that's really core of how we approach beers, is always, always throwing a few varieties together. Every now and then we'll get a couple out with one or two. Like our Gen 1 IPA, which is our only kind of regular IPA that we brew down here, is just Citra Mosaic. And that's a great combination, and we had to do one like that. But mostly we like to get a few varieties in there because there's just so much you get by layering the different hops together, I think.
Yeah, I mean, this is super cool. Just from a appearance perspective, from an aroma perspective, it's decidedly new school West Coast IPA, what all the kids want right now. And what I like about it on the nose is that you are getting a lot of that like really wonderful fruit aromas, the berry, the tropical, a little bit of that bubble gum, but you do have just like hints of dankness there. You have hints of pine, a little, kind of all these like subtle background aromas that keep that fruitiness from going like too far over the top, which I think is really nice.
Yeah, and part of what brings that fruit together too for us is just our house yeast character. And I think it's really distinctive, if you compare it to something like a Cal Ale or American Ale, which gets a little more out of the way with the hops. Our yeast is also present, and so some of that fruitiness, some of the kind of like bubble gummy or like juicy fruit gum, or a little bit of a banana aspect maybe that kind of integrates into the tropical fruit. That's coming from the yeast, and that's really adding something. And so I think, that's why for us, when we started making Mine Haze and started doing hazy IPAs and really working those out, bringing in some of the other more, ester forward English strains were really familiar to us. They're all a little bit different, but just intuitively, we've always loved the interaction you get with yeast, with the fermentation character and the hops.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Well, I'm gonna give this baby a try. Great balance on this beer, like 9%. Not overly tropical, not overly bitter, but it's got very strong aspects of both. And what I like about this beer, and I'm drinking it slightly warmer than you probably typically would, but it does, like, it backs up that 9%, not in a bad way that's like, oh, this is boozy or anything like that, but a lot of these new school beers, like, they'll be 9-10% and they'll drink like 6 or 7, and sometimes you want a beer that like kind of like stands up to what it actually is, in a way that wraps it all up in a really nice way that makes it really balanced. And I think that's what this beer does. It's really cool.
Yeah, we tried to keep the bitterness in check. That's something that has always been kind of a house thing for us, is keeping bitterness a little bit smoother. And I think our yeast strain is a big part of that, is that it pulls a little more IBU out than some other strains. So you kind of max out, maybe around 70 IBUs. I think this is closer to 60. And in a beer like that comes off as really round, and we use a pretty soft water profile overall. We use RO water here, so we're stripping down all of our water and then just building back the minerals we want. And for West Coast-style beers like this, I'll go a little bit heavier on gypsum, which is typical, but we don't go too out of control with it. Like some of the brewers really like to Burtonize their water out of a ton of gypsum, and I think that can make, for the right beer, it's nice and snappy, gives you that really crisp bitterness, but a bit too much can make things harsh. So I think we hit a nice balanced level on that.
Yeah, this is really nice. I want to say, like, this is going down really fast, but then you have to remind yourself it's 9%. It's only 5 p.m. You gotta gotta rein it in a little bit, right? Yeah, this is a cool beer. I like this a lot. So what are your thoughts? Like, how do you think it came out? Obviously you like it, but like, is there anything you would do differently, or is anything, not that you would do differently, but anything that you're excited about iterating on for like future double IPAs?
Yeah, wow. I mean, there's always, every time we put out a new batch, part of the kind of R&D wheels churning in your head is always thinking, yeah, what's going to be the next one, and what are we going to change? And it's almost by the time the beer comes out, I already know, And I was already subtly tweaking. It actually took 3 batches of this beer to get it. So it takes 2 batches for cans. We did another batch for draft too, and I was already subtly tweaking it as we were brewing it. So by the time you get to cans, that's like my final iteration. That last batch was like, okay, I think I nailed it. And they're very small tweaks. I don't even know if anybody's going to taste the difference.
Right.
It's just like it's like dialing in stuff like mash pH and like wort pH and like coming in and saying, I think I'm going to drop the IBU by 5 on the next one because I think it's just like maybe a little high, but it ended up pretty much right where I wanted it. So I think we already did some of that tweaking as far as like just basically dialing in the IBUs. Thinking about the hop additions and the timing, the different mosaic. We had 2 different lots of mosaic actually. I used one in the first one, and then I felt that we have one mosaic that's a little more dank and one mosaic that's a little more berry. And I tried the dank one first, and I like that one, and I think that batch came out really cool. But then we switched to the more berry-like mosaic, and I think that was really cool too. So actually, that's the mosaic that's in the cans, whereas the draft batch got the other mosaic. So just something as simple as that. So it's funny, we've actually been comparing the 2 side by side, and it's like I think 9 out of 10 people that come in here wouldn't notice the difference. But if you're told, and right. And you're an experienced beer drinker, have a good palate, like you might pick up on that little subtle difference. So those are the kind of things we're always thinking of. Just thinking of even down to one variety of hop and saying like, I think that lot's going to go better in the beer, or that's going to create the flavor that I want. And as far as onward to the next double IPA, maybe I want to go a little bit more robust on the malt next time. Maybe go back to wheat, see what this beer would do without the rye, because I think you definitely get a little something there from the rye. It's hard for me to put my finger on, but whenever I have a pale rye beer, I'm always intrigued by it because rye beers tend to be darker, and I'm never really exactly sure why that trend started, but most rye IPAs are dark. They're like more of like a reddish color or whatever. And just if you use regular rye malt, it's pale. It's not dark. So I'm not sure where that trend started. And the couple pale rye beers I've had have always been really nice. I think look back on Alpine Nelson, has some rye in it, and that was one of the first ones I ever had that really changed my mind there. And I said, ooh, I don't know what the rye's adding here, but this beer's great. I remember the first time I had that was probably 12 years ago now. And it just blew my mind. Right. So maybe I've always wanted to kind of recreate that malt bill, and this is the first time we've ever actually done it. That just kind of super pale approach. I think they probably add a couple more things into it. I think it's maybe not quite this pale.
I think what you said though with the rye adding structure, like that keeps coming back into my mind here, because there is kind of this like, if it was an all Pilsner double IPA, I feel like it could be a little bit like one note. And the rye kind of gives it this structure. I mean, I think that's the best word to describe it. I think it's pretty cool. It's subtle, but I think it's noticeable if you're really trying to figure it out.
Yeah, rye has a lot of beta-glucans. It's a really sticky, gummy grain to work with. That's why brewing beers with really high rye content is extremely difficult. And so, just at a small percent, I think this is probably about 7%, 8% of the grain bill. And that's kind of the typical thing we've done. If you go back, beer like Wookey Jack, that's about the level we're at. In Wookey Jack, I think that's always added a nice element to it. And I've always felt like, it adds some structure and roundness to the body. And just knowing that the rye itself is just, it's a very hearty grain, I think it's got a lot of spirit. If, I don't know if that makes any sense, but rye is like, I'm here, I want to be known, It definitely lets you know it's doing something. But versus wheat, which tends to be a little softer. Wheat can also add a nice mouthfeel to beer. Obviously, it kind of rounds beers out, adds a softness to them, but also a fullness sometimes. So, I always like playing with a little bit of either one. We tend to lean on wheat for the most part. Our Gen 1 IPA down here's got some unmalted wheat in it, and that's been kind of a norm for us. So we've brewed a lot of double IPAs with unmalted wheat too, and really like what a touch of that adds. So. I'm a sucker for that. Maybe I'll see what this hop combination does with that.
And I think what's really cool about this beer is, beers like this at 9% that have this kind of like massive hop presence the way that this beer does, I feel like they tend to like drink a lot heavier. They kind of weigh down a little bit as you go through the beer. And this one stays really light and it stays really bright too. It doesn't saturate your tongue and kind of give you that like really full mouthfeel feeling. Yeah, and I think the bitterness, the restraint on the bitterness has a lot to do with that as well. But yeah, it's just I think that compared to beers that I've had in this kind of vein, in this bigger side, like West Coast Double IPA with a lot of hops, like, yeah, this is really just light and bright for me. It makes me want to drink more and more of it. It's really good.
That kind of lighter style of kind of modern IPA, a big key part of that too is making sure you have a higher attenuation. And I think that's kind of what a lot of people are picking up on now that are a little burned out on hazy IPAs is the higher finishing gravities. And, if you're getting beers that are finishing up, 5-6 Plato, maybe that realm, they help round out these delicious, juicy hop flavors, and that bit of sweetness and that, that body there can really help make some really great flavors. But at the same time, they can be a little bit less drinkable overall, less refreshing, and so it's good to have both options too. I think, as a brewery that, and I'm not gonna say we weren't the latest to the haze game, but we got in there a little bit after, a lot of the other brewers did. There are a few curmudgeon holdouts, I think, that, we never went out there and said we're never brewing a hazy like a few brewers did that maybe are still holding out,
right,
or, just finally in the last year or two changed their mind. But I think we've embraced both styles, and we've really learned a lot from brewing hazy IPAs as far as, balancing bitterness and like, combining new hop, new varieties and new ways basically to get, really bright, really expressive fruit forward aromas. So I like taking, what you learn going through that new process and everything, and then coming back into, West Coast and saying, how can we reapproach this? And, and that's kind of how the evolution was happening all along with West Coast. I think there were a lot of brewers already making beers like this, back when hazies really started to take off. And, maybe just as the market's kind of matured a little bit, and the hazy game is kind of like, gotten to a saturation point as far as like everybody's going to do it's done it at this point, kind of thing. So we can kind of come back and appreciate West Coast IPAs as a different way to attack hops. And you say, it's a little drier, it's a little crisper, more refreshing, but you can still deliver a really nice hop aroma and hop flavor.
I have another beer here that I wanted to ask you about. It is the Galaxy single hop from the IPA pack, the Crafted by Hops pack that you guys put out. So this one is hopped with Galaxy, and tell me a little bit about this series, like the Propagator Series specifically. When people see this in the cans, like, does that mean it was brewed at like the Propagator, or the idea was conceived there? Like, what does that mean?
So yeah, the 16-ounce cans with the labels, those are all brewed here. And, if you're ever in doubt, it will say, brewed in Los Angeles or brewed in Paso Robles. And so you can always look on the can, and that'll tell you for sure. So those ones will say Paso Robles on them. So that series started as our single hop IPA series here. So these are all beers that were brewed here as part of the single hop series that we do. And then the ones that we liked and said, okay, that's worth, doing a release of, then they graduate up to the mix packs. So yeah, I think that was one that we did. It was actually a while ago, was the Galaxy one. I think that was before I didn't brew that one. But that was one that we always knew, we always knew with Galaxy is from the first time we brewed with it, we said, hey, this is coming back at some point when we can get enough of this. So this is the first year we were able to get a big enough contract to do a full release of it, and we're really excited about it. And I'm really jazzed up on the Galaxy we got. I think it's really nice. Just lots of good, saturated, ripe, tropical fruit, a little bit dank, but, it's definitely got that signature Australian vibe. So yeah, so the single IPA series we do here, we do either hazy or West Coast, and that's why in some of the mix packs we do, in the bottle mix packs, you'll see a West Coast single hop.
Yeah, I have one right here, the Idaho 7 one, and then I have the Galaxy for the can. So the Galaxy's the one in the latest release. Have you tried this one?
Yes. Yeah, it's yeah. I mean, what can you say about Galaxy? It's a cool hop. When Galaxy's on, it's one of the coolest hops out there, and I think the reason that it took the world by storm is that there's something that it's got. It's hard. I remember the first trial beer we brewed at Galaxy originally kind of blew everybody's mind, just that kind of oily, resinous-y kind of character that it has to it is really cool. But otherwise the base beer is very similar. It's our standard kind of hazy base approach, which is essentially the same as Mine Haze. So you can kind of think of it as almost a single hop version of that.
Yeah, is there something about Galaxy that plays really well, like better in a hazy than a West Coast? Like, in your mind, do you think that the application for a single hop IPA is better for Galaxy in hazy form or in West Coast form?
I think it works well for both, but I think with a hazy, the interesting aspect about Galaxy is it's super high oil content. It's one of the highest oil content hops. And the good thing about hazy IPAs, and the thing that really makes them unique, is that the haze carries some of those oils into the finished beer in a way that a clear IPA doesn't, because of the polarity of the compounds. And so you have these non-polar hop compounds, that don't stay in solution as well in traditional clear IPAs. But in a hazy IPA, the way the haze structure works is it'll bind some of those compounds that'll stay into solution. So that's what rounds out more of the mouthfeel and the juiciness and all that to it. And so you get a unique experience with a hazy IPA with Galaxy, where you're able to experience that high oil content and like get that real saturation in a way that's difficult to get with a West Coast beer. So beautiful character in a clear beer, but a little bit different. And I think it's almost it's just I think so. Hazy's really cool, and I think more exceptional with a hop like Galaxy.
Yeah, it's really good. You mentioned that when you just went up for harvest, selecting Galaxy, that this next crop of Galaxies just looking really good. What about it stands out to you? What makes you excited about this newest crop?
It's the way just the round fruitiness kind of comes across. I mean, it just it's smelling the hops up there. It's funny because with hop selection, so we saw the new Galaxy, but at the same time, that Galaxy was actually picked in the spring, but they've got it pelletized and then sent up. And so now that they have it, they're like, okay, check it out. So it's it's not like the same hop selection that we went through with this stuff, just coming out of the field. So kind of a different experience. Basically, they're just showing us, they're like, hey, here's the Galaxy for the year. Here's what you're going to get. What do you think? Versus like when you're going up selecting, the Northwest varieties, it's, hey, here's samples right out of the field that we haven't even pelletized yet. What do you like? What do you want us to pelletize for you? So it's a little bit different, but it's really nice to be able to see that, to get that first look at the next Galaxy coming up.
Nice. So the single hop series, is that something you're still playing around with, or has that been on pause since COVID, or are you still doing single hop stuff at the Propagator?
We haven't been doing much at the Propagator. I want to say the last one we did was with Barbe Rouge. That's a new French hop that's got some nice red berry character to it, some kind of strawberry raspberry thing going on, maybe some currants. That's a cool hop. We did one last fall, but for the most part, though, we've actually switched. So, the single hop series, was going strong here for a few years, and we basically used most of the the cool new hops we wanted to use in that series already. So now we're like kind of happy to like kind of pick our favorites and go back to them and then ramp them up to put in the mix packs. So we kind of stopped doing that actually down here. Like I said, it's been about a year since we've brewed one now. And what we do now with new hops actually is we have a series of 1-barrel fermenters, just a little cellar essentially that's just these tiny little tanks, and we'll divert wort. So like we're taking the base Mine Haze wort, and then if we want to try new hops up there, we're now doing single hop trials there, and we can dry hop it with different hop varieties. And that allows us a lot of flexibility. So you can knock out a bunch of different hops at once, and then keg them all off, taste them, and get through it. Whereas here, you're going through and you're brewing up a new batch for each one. So it's it's fun if you want to have the beer on tap and have it around for a while and have people drinking it. And so we did like doing that. But just from a pure efficiency standpoint, from an R&D standpoint, it's really advantageous to be able to do a bunch at a time. But that's where most of the single hop focus is right now, and I think that's just one of those things. Yeah, maybe it just kind of coincided with COVID, where we kind of petered out because of that. And single hop beers are always, unless it's a really good one, they don't sell quite as well as hop blend IPAs. Just because not every hop's a winner. Barbe Rouge is a good example. Barbe Rouge is great. I really enjoyed it, but nobody knows what Barbe Rouge is. It's French. What's up with that? So it wasn't as popular. Like if you brew a Citra or a Mosaic or like a Nelson single hop, everyone that's into hops knows those. So they're like, ooh, yeah, I want to order that. And then they look at some other hops and they just kind of go, eh. So for the most part, it's good to do that on a smaller scale, especially with newer varieties you're unsure of.
When you do those like micro dry hop, those micro hopped experiments, do those go on tap at the propagator, or are those just
No,
like
those don't go on tap. Yeah, that just gets tasted with our internal sensory panel, and we'll get get data from all that. Yeah, and then we don't actually sell them.
I mean, I feel like for me, I've just been all over Strata the past couple, like 1.5 to 2 years, and a lot of breweries too. Like it's just you're seeing Strata. So I feel like that was kind of like a nice hype hop over the past year. Looking forward, is there anything that you think is like the next big hop that, at least in your mind, that you think it deserves a little bit of attention?
Well, I think Talus already has gotten the attention of a lot of brewers, but maybe hasn't been utilized as well as it could have yet. It's not necessarily a single hop type beer, or single hop type hop for single hop beers. We did do a single hop here actually a couple years ago with it. We had done a sponsorship of the variety back before it was Talus, when it was still an experimental variety. So we got some hops from that year before last. I think last year was the first year they started naming it Talus. I think the single hop beer we brewed, it was extremely floral, had extremely unique characters of this just kind of like rose petal and geraniol and some grapefruit, a lot of really interesting kind of grapefruit citrus character too. So that's a really cool hop, and I think brewers are latching on more to it. It's really good in hazy IPAs. I think it's really good hot side, really good in the whirlpool. It's really high geraniol content, and geraniol transforms into some more citrusy compounds. It's more floral, but then some of it changes into citrusy compounds like citronellol. So that's a really cool hop because of that and the unique characters it has. It's not going to take over from Strata or Citra Mosaic or something like that. And I think that's why Strata has become the new hot hop, because it's the one that you can like feature, you can single hop, and it's great and people love it. But there's a lot of room for these other hops that aren't necessarily stars on their own, but work really well in blends with other hops and really bring something to the table that's unique and powerful. So that's a really good one in that realm. I mean, we're big fans of Cashmere now, and I'd like to see more. I'd like to see Cashmere be the next hop that rises up to the level of like a Citra Mosaic or Strata at this point. I think it's a beautiful hop, and we love what's coming out of the hop breeding programs like Hop Breeding Company. But I love to see Cashmere coming out of the USDA public breeding program too. See a little love there from we all support that with our tax dollars, that breeding program. So it's good to see a great hop coming out of it, and something that that all the growers everywhere can grow. I think there's a new variety. I forget the number exactly of it, but there's one that's going to be released soon out of the USDA program as well. That's getting a lot of good energy behind it. That's got a lot of good tropical character. So I can't wait to see that on a larger scale. Yeah, but I'd say Talus for the most part. That's the one that we've been really fond of. That kind of makes its way into some new stuff. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, people are already on the New Zealand stuff. I don't need to tell people about New Zealand varieties.
Right.
Some of the this is the first year I think the growers in New Zealand really ramped up their production of Rawaka. And Rawaka is a hard to grow hop. It doesn't yield very well. And so it was really hard to get for years. And it's just started to increase in availability. And I think we got some really good stuff this year that I've been really happy with too. So that's a really nice one. And this might sound weird, but I love Willamette. And it's one of the classic American varieties. It's kind of dying out, but I think there's a few growers that aren't going to let it go. It's a really beautiful hop for lagers. It's something that I think we can hang our hats on and say it's like a almost this like beautiful noble like quality, but also with a little tinge of this Americanness that's like slightly citrusy at the same time. And the growers that are sticking by it are doing a great job. So that's one that I hope doesn't go anywhere.
Cool, man. Well, looking towards the future, I mean, I want to wrap this up. Like, what's next for Firestone Propagator? What's next for you? What do you got going on? Kind of closing out 2021.
Well, yeah, we've got a couple fun new can releases coming up here. So, like I said, Wookey Jack's coming back. We just brewed the first batch of that, and I'm very excited for Wookey. It's one of those ones where it's like I never want it to change. I just need people to keep appreciating black IPAs like that forever, and I think it will. It's one of those beers where it's got enough fans that I don't think it's going to go anywhere. Now that we've kind of found the perfect forum for it, brewing it here at the Propagator, which is really cool that we were able to do because because it's just one of those beers that when we brought it back earlier in the year, so many people were excited about it. I mean, some of my own family members just lost it. They were so happy about it coming back. There's a lot of Wookey Jack fans out there, we know, and maybe it'll get ramped up on a larger scale again at some point. But for now, I think we've hit the stride where I guess you got to be in California, but if you're in California, you can order yourself a 4-pack or stop by one of the brewery locations and pick it up when that comes out. And so that'll be out next month. I think we are releasing that. It'll be around the 20th. But that'll all get notified on social media when that comes out.
Yeah, we'll let everybody know that we're big fans of Wookey Jack.
Yeah, so jazz for that. Also, we're going to be doing interesting for our last can release of the year. We're doing this kind of like milk and cookies themed stout, where we're brewing a big milk stout with a bunch of oats, and then we're going to be adding some brown sugar and some cocoa nibs and some vanilla beans to it, and just kind of go for your I just want to drink a oatmeal chocolate chip cookie type thing, and so have a little fun with that. We don't play big in the pastry stout game, but we like to dip our toes every once in a while on something that sounds like a delicious combination. So we just did a stout, the cinnamon dolce stout with vanilla and cinnamon. I think we're on a vanilla kick right now, so I thought, and we've done a lot of cocoa in other stouts in the past, and we love working with cocoa nibs, and so we just thought we'd combine that with some vanilla and put it in a new stout. So that'll be coming out in December, and that'll wrap it up for the year. And then we've got a really exciting collaboration that will be coming out at the beginning of next year, but I'm not going to say exactly what that is. But it's a collab that we've done before in the past with one of our favorite breweries, and so I'm really excited to be doing that one again. But yeah, other than that, just a couple new ideas here and there. We'll see, probably a couple more big IPAs, things like that. We're just having fun with it. We've got a triple Hazy IPA coming out very soon out of here. That's just going to be a draft only release. So yeah, we never keep playing with the IPAs.
The practice run.
Yeah.
Is that the practice run for Bistro?
Yeah, exactly. We'll see. We're doing, it's triple hazy. We'll probably we'll do a triple West Coast soon too. So we got to start working out recipes, get competition ready. We got to get in shape.
Yeah, I hear you. Cool. That's a fun competition, and sounds like a lot of really cool stuff coming up for you guys. So anyone listening, hit up the Propagator, because I think it's never been more exciting. And also the beer that we drink today, Psychedelic Arcade West Coast Double IPA. By the time you're listening to this, it's out. So go seek it out. Hit the website, hit the Propagator, and do what you need to do to grab it, because it's super, super good. And Sam, thank you so much for joining me today. Really appreciate it. You're a busy guy. I know you got a lot going on. So it was fun hearing about your journey a little bit.
Yeah, no, thank you. Awesome chance to get on and chat with you, and glad you like the beer and appreciate it, and hope you come by again sometime soon.
For sure. All right, okay. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, cheers.
And that does it for this episode of Beer Breakdown. Thank you so much to Sam for joining me on the podcast and filling us all in on all the really cool stuff that Firestone Walker is doing over at the Propagator location in Venice. Once again, get your hands on Psychedelic Arcade, this delicious West Coast-style Double IPA, if you can, and if not, look out for all the Propagator releases. They're putting out some really, really special stuff. And I think my greatest advice to you is head down to Venice sometime and take a seat at the brew pub. Check out the outdoor beer garden that they have set up. Order some beers, order some food, and just enjoy yourself, because it doesn't get much better than that. I love Firestone Walker. Can't say enough good things about them. And I'm so glad that they're continuing to invest in R&D and innovation and pushing the envelope and finding new ways to bring us delicious beer and keep us all excited about craft beer, because there's not many breweries that do it as well as they do. So follow Sam at Into the Brew on Twitter, on Instagram. Follow Firestone Walker if you don't already. They have an Instagram for their Propagator location that you're going to want to follow as well. And subscribe to our newsletter. That's really where all of our coolest stuff comes out. So head over to hopdela.com/subscribe, join our email newsletter, and we'll have some awesome stuff over to you soon. Thanks so much for listening, and we will see you in a couple weeks. Cheers.